Hello, Johnny from Eurogamer here, and this, if you didn't already know, is the latest trailer for Cyberpunk 2077. It's packed with detail, as we've discussed before on the channel, and it certainly looks great, but aside from the odd corporation name or piece of tech, it doesn't really tell us how similar this game is to tabletop role-playing game Cyberpunk 2020. Thankfully, I saw the 50-minute behind closed doors demo at E3, and since then I've been going over the 2020 rulebook in order to tease out the bits that line up, and those that don't, and try to get a fix on just how similar these two games are. There's absolutely loads to talk about here, more than I can reasonably fit into one video in fact, so today I'll just be talking about character classes, how they work in 2077, and how they compare to the pen and paper game. Apologies in advance for the lack of varied footage in this video. There is a lot to talk about and, as I'm sure you're already aware, very little to show, so you're gonna end up watching these two trailers a fair amount. Sorry about that, I promise it'll be worth it. So Chumba, just how much Cyberpunk 2020 is there in Cyberpunk 2077? Well, the short answer is loads. Just on the front cover of Cyberpunk 2020, you've got this mean-looking guy wearing a jacket very similar to the one V sports in this trailer, and also wears throughout the demo we saw at E3. This jacket, as it so happens, is actually quite an important part of your character stats in 2077, but we'll talk about that in a separate video. Anyway, in the same picture you also see a lady in front of a car that's a pretty solid visual match for this one in the E3 trailer, which is a pretty nice touch. The cover of Cyberpunk 2020 also boasts a quote from somebody called Johnny Silverhand. Now, in the E3 demo, we found V waking up in the morning after a bit of a bender, which apparently culminated in a one-night stand. Racy. Anyway, as we moved about her apartment, there was a song playing on the radio that, we were told, was by none other than Johnny Silverhand himself. Johnny Silverhand, in the world of 2020, and apparently 2077 as well, is a renowned musician, or, in the parlance of the tabletop game, a rocker boy. Rocker boy is a class you can play in Cyberpunk 2020. They are described as rebel rockers who use music and revolt to fight authority. Unfortunately, you won't be able to play as a rocker boy in 2077, but nonetheless, it's a lovely bit of detail that immediately helped ground the 2077 demo in the same world. Now, there's no shortage of Johnny Silverhand quotes in the 2020 core rulebook, but one quote in particular really caught my attention fairly early on. It's this one. She had these incredible blue eyes, clear through and through like crystals of lace, and a smile from a magazine dream. Of course, the eyes were Technics 2350s and the smile really was from a magazine. Nice biosculpt job. It didn't matter how much was real in the end, I still fell hard for her. I'm that type. Aw, Johnny. And sure, that's a bit of fluff between sections of the rulebook, but I couldn't help thinking about this bit in the trailer when a woman is doing her shot changes to reveal she has a prosthetic, biosculpt mouth. Coincidence? Maybe, but I'd like to think it's a subtle nod to old Johnny Silverhand's taste in women. Anyway, let's get back to talking about that class system, because it's one of the most significant departures from 2020 we're going to see in Cyberpunk 2077. In the pen and paper game, there are 9 different classes to choose from when creating your character, these being rocker boys, solos, netrunners, techies, medias, cops, corporates, fixers, and nomads. In Cyberpunk 2077, on the other hand, there are no classes to pick from. That's not to say those roles aren't present in the game world, of course. We've talked about Johnny Silverhand already, of course, but the demo mainly centered around a mission given to V by a fixer. In Cyberpunk 2020, fixers are the people with more connections and shady deals on the go than most people have implants. These are the people who don't get their hands dirty directly, but are the ones pulling the strings and hiring the cyberpunks necessary to get the job done. Cyberpunks like V. Now, this mission in turn led to talking to a corporate, specifically a woman working for Militech, a huge weapons manufacturer in Night City. Corporates, as described in the 2020 core book, are basically yuppies. They're slick business raiders walking a thin line between getting killed by someone who wants their job and offing the person directly above them in the chain of succession. They're well-resourced, disgustingly wealthy, and utterly ruthless. Indeed, the conversation we saw between V and Meredith Stout, the Militech agent, got rough extremely quickly, and V was on the receiving end of pretty much all of it, with only her quick thinking and a silver tongue keeping her from catching a bullet in the back of the head. From there, V went to a warehouse crewed by a bunch of ne'er-do-wells who had stolen a nifty little robot directly from Militech. And these people were undoubtedly Techies. Techies in the cyberpunk world are pretty much as they sound, people obsessed with technology and how it works, whether they use that drive and knowledge to fix things for cash, boost new tech from the unsuspecting, or modify tech to work entirely differently. In the case of the Techies in the demo, we saw evidence of people having been kidnapped in order to have their cybernetics taken from them, and Maelstrom were attempting to sell the aforementioned robot in order to get more money and continue upgrading themselves, as that particular group of Techies was obsessed with becoming entirely machines themselves. Not all Techies are horrible kidnapping chip gougers, mind you. Techies can also be Ripper Doctors, which, I'll admit, doesn't sound much better given the name, but bear with me. Ripper Doctors are people who specialise in selling, installing, repairing or modifying bits of tech to needy cyberpunks. Some of them operate legally, while others work out of shady dens where they're free to install cybernetics that definitely don't fall on the right side of the law. During our demo, V visited a Ripper Doctor by the name of Dr. Victor, who helped install a new eyeball with an optical zoom and a handy scanner, and a subdermal weapon grip enabling V to see her ammo count and alternate fire modes, as well as boosting the damage dealt to enemies by bullets. What I'm getting at here is that the classes you may remember from Cyberpunk 2020 aren't absent from the game entirely. These people are still very much present and vivid in 2077. It's just that you aren't offered a bunch of character archetypes at the start of the game as you are in other RPGs and in Cyberpunk 2020. In other words, you aren't locked into one specific character build. Instead, Cyberpunk 2077 has what CD Projekt Red quest designer Patrick Mills describes as a fluid class system. What CD Projekt has done, in essence, is pull 3 classes they really like out of 2020 and then built 3 different skill trees around those. You're free to pursue just one, or dabble in all 3 if you like, building the character you want. Here's what those classes are and how we saw them play out in the demo. First up, there's the Solo. The game describes these as hired assassins, bodyguards, killers, soldiers. Solos are all about combat augmentations, super fast reflexes, a penchant for combat stims, and of course a hefty amount of currency dropped into lethal body modifications. It's no real surprise that this is one of the 3 main paths in Cyberpunk 2077, as, while the game is most definitely still an RPG with stats and numbers and everything, it is first person and you do spend a fair amount of time pointing a gun at people and making them lie down. In the demo we saw, V had put quite a bit into the solo path, giving her a quick slide ability with which to dash across the room and flank an enemy. There was also a sort of bullet time moment during which the action slowed down, but V was able to aim as normal. This is fairly standard fare for a game involving first-person shooting, of course, but even here we can find some useful ties to Cyberpunk 2020. If we look at the core rulebook, there's a cybernetic augmentations manufacturer called Kerenzikov. Kerenzikov Neuralware, in the lore, is an easily installed piece of kit that boosts your reaction times. In the pen and paper game, this works mechanically by improving your initiative rolls, effectively giving you a better chance of taking your turn before anybody else. Of course, Cyberpunk 2077's combat is not turn-based, so instead we get the bullet time mechanic. There's also a rifle that has bullets curve round to the target, which looked extremely cool, and those sword arms from the first teaser are very much a real thing, by the way. Anyway, I mentioned Kerenzikov specifically because that was the name plastered on one of the inhaler-like devices V used to take some combat stims right in the middle of a fight. So while the mechanics aren't quite the same, and stims are now taken orally rather than injected as they are in 2020, it's clear CD Projekt Red has really done its homework on this one. The solo class path was by far the most prominent one during the 50 minutes of gameplay we saw, but we also got a glimpse at what it's like to try your hand at being a techie. She may not have pulled out anyone's eyeball or scavenged some parts from a corpse, but with the engineering pathway, V had the know-how to mess with tech in the world around her, disassembling a panel in order to open up a new pathway for herself. Again, it was a fairly brief glimpse, but I'm excited to see what else the Techie class has in store in Cyberpunk 2077, as I think it could have some fairly excellent uses in setting people up for a catastrophic, so-called accident a la Hitman. Hopefully, anyway. Now, I mentioned that there are 3 class-based pathways you can pursue in Cyberpunk 2077, and anyone who's even remotely familiar with 2020 will know that netrunning is a significant portion of the game. Netrunners, as if I need to tell you, are hackers who plug their brains directly into the internet and zip through the virtual space in order to find and infiltrate juicy data fortresses and harvest the data kept inside. Some do this to sell said data on to interested parties, but netrunners can also do such nefarious things as tampering with security systems and even killing other people jacked into the net in a move called flatlining someone. In terms of pen and paper RPGs, you can effectively think of netrunning as Cyberpunk's equivalent of magic, with netrunners sacrificing physical toughness and fighting ability for powerful abilities in other, more specific areas. Now again, with the character build we saw in the demo being very much a solo build, we didn't see loads of netrunning from V, although the bit we did see was, frankly, awesome. At one point we saw her studding into a dead guy using interface cables built into her wrist in order to access a control menu linked to the Maelstrom building she was locked inside, as well as the other combatants therein. She used this menu to load malware into her enemies and sever the link between them and their weapons, meaning their guns wouldn't fire. Some might say that's really more of a tacky thing, but given she literally hacked some other human beings, I'm happy to call that a bit of netrunning. Anyway, as you might imagine, it gave them a huge leg up in combat. Beyond that, much of the evidence of netrunning we got in the demo came to us through a character called T-Bug. We never saw T-Bug. Being a netrunner, she was safely stashed in a building somewhere throughout the mission, rather than joining V and her solo friend Jackie for the rough, tough stuff. Even though she was only present in voice comms, mind you, her influence on the world was still greatly evident. She was able to open doors, feed a steady stream of information about the developing situation and the enemies they were up against, and suggest tactical options to V throughout. In other words, netrunners in Cyberpunk 2077 are every bit as powerful, under the right circumstances, as they are in Cyberpunk 2020. Studying into a control panel isn't the same as making a proper net run, mind you, so I'm very much intrigued to see how that will be manifested in the finished game. I have some theories on that, actually, but in the interest of time, I'm going to come back to those in a different video very soon. Long story short, netrunning is definitely a thing, and definitely impactful, even if we didn't get to see loads of it. So those are the 3 paths that make up Cyberpunk 2077's fluid class character system. I think they're quite exciting, but at this point you might well be thinking, hang on, does this mean I'm not going to know what my character is like until I've already earned and spent lots of skill points? The good news, and the short answer, is no, that is not the case. At the very start of the game, just as you pick your gender and customise your appearance, you're asked to work out your character's identity in something called a life path. A life path is very much part of character creation in Cyberpunk 2020 and in the advanced rules of Cyberpunk v3. It has 7 sections covering national and ethnic origins, family, friends, enemies, personal habits, and even a timeline that records key events in your life on a yearly basis. All of this is meant to provide a backdrop and depth to your character, their past, and what drives them personally, and it's through picking your own life path that you first get a fix on who your version of V is in Cyberpunk 2077. It should be noted, mind you, that this life path system is significantly stripped back versus the one in Cyberpunk 2020. You only have to pick 2 things: what your past was like, and what your motivation is for being in Night City. So compared to the multifaceted life path of Cyberpunk 2020, that may seem a bit threadbare, but I don't necessarily think that's bad. For one thing, it's a necessary trade-off in a video game with a strong, predefined story. In another, sometimes having a simple motivation is a good thing. You have a clearer sense of purpose when you get to say, I had a hard upbringing and now I'm out for revenge, rather than, well, it all started when I was born in 2010 and my father, a corporate security guard at the time, and so on and so forth. Right, and that will about do it. There's a look at some of the character classes in Cyberpunk 2020, how they're represented in Cyberpunk 2077, and how you can expect your character to work in the finished game. I'll be back very soon with more on Cyberpunk 2077, including those ideas about net running I mentioned, and a deep dive on the types of augmentations on offer in 2020 and how they're represented in Cyberpunk 2077. I will also try to do something to make these videos a bit more visually interesting. I promise. Anyway, hopefully you found this video interesting. If you did, there are plenty more for you to watch on screen now. Do like and subscribe for plenty more from Eurogamer on Cyberpunk and many other things, but most importantly, thank you very much for watching, and have a lovely day. Responsibility, personal responsibility.